What is happening, guys? My name's Dave and welcome to our 8 Simple Rules series. We wrote a bunch of rules a couple of years ago. We perfected them now, we feel like, but just in case we haven't, we're bringing some amazing managers on to talk us through them and give us their insights into what we should be doing better. As always, I've got Rich with me. Rich, how you doing? Heard you got the vaccine recently.
Yeah, I've just got it earlier, but I don't want to keep going on about it too much, you know.
No, you've only been doing it for the last 4 hours. And today we've got Mark, or FPL General. How's it going, man? Long time no see.
I'm good, guys. Good to be back recording with you. So it's, I think it was Rich, I think it was April time we did the last surgery together. So it's good to be back on and good to be doing the rules again, Dave. I was trying to think today back to when we did this last season, and I could not think of even one rule that we talked about. So it's good. It's good to do a refresher before the season starts.
That is another way of saying that they absolutely did not work for you. You didn't take them in at all, and you just used your own rules and your own wee list.
Maybe that's what the real truth is.
Well, they worked for me. But yeah, no, I've kind of realized after a whole season that they might need a little sprucing up. And also, you know, I'm pastures new podcast, new me. So I thought we'll bring it back and bring our favorite managers. So speaking of favorite managers, how do you feel like if someone said to you what type of manager you are, what would you say?
Words like boring and safe probably come to mind. You know, I don't tend to venture too crazy when it comes to captaincy and transfers. And, you know, what I've been saying to people as well, you know, when you see my game with one team, you probably there won't be any shocks. It'll be pretty similar to most teams. So, yeah. But you know what? Boring and safe has served me pretty well over the years. So, you know, I don't really see any reason to change.
There was one thing you did at the end of last season that I think it wasn't boring and safe, because I remember everyone was like, oh my God, the General was wildcarded. I think it was a few weeks before the end of the season.
Yeah, so I had a plan initially. I think it might have been game week 31 was my plan all along, and I think most people's plans were to wildcard in the same game week. And then I just spotted an opportunity to go a week early. I think it was to get triple Chelsea. Had a really good home fixture, and it's all coming back to me now because I must have blocked this out. I was out for the day with my wife, brought in triple Chelsea defence, and then was it 5-2 or something, Crystal Palace or something nuts like that. So yeah, it was certainly the wrong time to get on triple Chelsea.
So you're making fun of the rules at the start. Oh, I can't remember a single one. Should have been remembering them then. Yeah.
Yeah, I know exactly. Yeah, so that's why I'm happy to be here to do the refresher course before things kick off.
But it shows you're not, because you described yourself as boring and template, but obviously doing things like that, you do think out the box sometimes. And obviously it didn't work that time, but I think a lot of people were jealous of triple Chelsea defence at that time, and no one expected that to happen.
Yeah, it was probably a move. You know, probably put myself out of my comfort zone as a fantasy manager doing that. But I think there was probably a couple of reasons why I did that. It was probably at a point in the season where I was starting to get sick of FPL at that point last season. I was, you know, for the first time ever, I kind of fell out of love with the game. You know, my rank was dropping, so I was probably on tilt as well. You know, that probably played a part as well. I think I had maybe seven red arrows in a row when I did hit that wildcard button. So, you know, on reflection, I think that played a part. I think if things were going well for me at that point, I would have just stuck to the plan and went in game week 31, because it didn't work for me. Obviously, on another occasion, it could have worked and it could have been great. You know, you get 20 plus points from your triple Chelsea defence. But
yeah, the
real kick was the people who did wait till game week 31. They did really well. You know, players like Lingard, Salah, and all those guys did really well. So it was a double whammy. You know, the game week 30 didn't go well, but then also the wildcarders the week after did really well.
So is there a lesson that because last time we were talking about how you've got a list and it is just similar to the 8 simple rules that you're going to be following, and we talked a bit about how similar they are and what the differences were, things like you not going to be listening to much podcast, you're going to try and cut back on your Twitter time just to try and like consolidate your own thoughts and stuff. So do you feel like you followed your own lists last season, or did you waver a bit?
Probably followed them maybe 80 to 90%. Most things I did well, I think, last season. There was a couple of things like not focusing on overall rank, that was a big failure. I fell into the trap because I was doing really well for a long time, and it's very hard not to look at it and not, mention it on every podcast then. So that's something I'm really going to try and do this season. Is I say it every season, but I really want to try not focus on rank too much this season and just, put enjoyment first and put rank second, and whatever the rank is, it's going to be. So, but yeah, going back to your original point about, wildcarding a week early last season, on reflection, if I looked at my list of rules, which I probably stopped looking at, to be honest, when it got to about game week 30, because I was fed up with the game. One of them is, when you have a plan, stick to it. You don't have to. We know it's important to be flexible in FPL, and if new information pops up during the week and something looks better, then of course you can change. But I think on that occasion, I was trying to force things. I was trying to fix things because I was getting so many red arrows. So yeah, sticking to the plan, as we know over the years, more often than not, is the better play.
Yeah, and the amount of managers that we speak to that have a similar mantra, so perfect. Shall we get into it?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right. First rule, template team to start the season. You've already alluded to it. No shocks in your game week 1 team. What are you feeling about this rule?
Yeah, it's certainly me. I always think of myself game week 1. I think of it as it's a marathon. 8 million of us are at the start line. I'm happy to be one of those guys who just sets off pretty slowly with 7 million others, and we let the other 1 million run ahead of us, and we look at each other and we're like, those guys, what are they doing? We'll catch them. We'll pass them out. Let them go. Let them have their 3 or 4 weeks of excitement. But in the long run, will they still be at the front game week 38? I don't think so. So yeah, for me, it's always the same. It's very boring. It's very safe. Looking at my current draft, it's the same as most I see on social media. Bruno, Salah, the popular cheap strikers. I like the Liverpool defensive double up. So yeah, template team for me. I don't ever go on the FPL website and sort by ownership and pick the top 3 defenders going by ownership. I think the template picks itself anyway. They are the best options. They've got the best fixtures. They're proven FPL assets. So yeah, like I said, when you see my game week 1 team, probably won't be any promoted players, probably won't be any new players to the league and stuff like that. So yeah, very much slow and steady to begin with. Most important thing is how you use those transfers then in the first couple of game weeks.
With the no promoted players, would that include, for example, maybe goalkeepers who can be considered slightly different? And also Tony, obviously he's got, and you said you don't sort by price point, but he's quite highly owned and quite popular on Twitter, for example.
Yeah, so I think you make a good point about the goalkeepers. I think when it comes to promoted teams, we probably should look at their goalkeepers slightly differently, because we often see it. The promoted goalkeepers do really well. Sam Johnston comes to mind from last season. Even a goalkeeper who gets relegated, if they're 4.5 million, they're going to be busy all season. They're going to rack up those save points. They're probably going to face more penalties than the bigger side, so there's always a chance of a couple of penalty saves there as well, and we know how huge they are when they happen. You guarantee the 3 bonus as soon as you save one. So yeah, I think if I'm thinking about game week 1 now, if I was to say which promoted player has the best chance of being in my team, it's probably Backman, the goalkeeper, because I'm struggling with the goalkeeper position, and he is on my short list, so he's in my thoughts. You mentioned Tony as well. Again, I do like to go for the proven Premier League guys. This guy does look amazing. Now, I haven't seen much of him, but if you look back not just on last season, his time at Peterborough as well, the numbers are really, really good. And I do expect him to carry it into the Premier League and to be a good pick at 6.5 million. But I always want to see a player first before I, pay the cash. And I just think there's so many proven strikers, 7.5, 8 million. It's much easier to go with them first and then drop down to Tony than it is to go for Tony. He disappoints and then to step up to a more expensive striker. But I'm not going to sit here and say he's definitely not going to be on my team, because at that price, 6.5, 6, there's nothing else really. You've got Pookie, tough fixtures, Welbeck, no thank you.
Yeah.
So I think in a lot of ways, Tony actually just picks himself as almost, if you're drafting a team, you pick 14 players, you've got 6.5 million left for your striker. It's like the last piece of the jigsaw. Even if you don't want it to be. A lot of drafts I've made, he's in there because there's not much else at his price.
Yeah, poor Wilson. Poor Wilson. No, but you're absolutely right. Like, the perfect storm is what Tony is. He's hyped. He's got previous experience with scoring a lot of goals. Maybe not in the Premier League, but certainly in the last two teams he was in. There's not really anyone around him, and also the prices are set this year so that you kind of don't want to spend a lot of money in your defense because of how many options there are. So your money has to go somewhere. And, 3 strikers is the norm these days. So, perfect storm for him. It's weird because he kind of breaks that rule, doesn't he, a little bit?
Yeah, exactly. One thing I really like, I think one big thing Tony has going for him as well as a pick, you can get him for those fixtures that are not too bad at the start. And if it doesn't go well, you let Pukki get his tough fixtures out of the way. And, I really like Pukki as a player. I think he could have easily been the same price as Tony. So I think 6 million is quite a tempting price for Pukki. Being in the Premier League before as well. I think, 26 goals last season. So I think you can take the punt on Tony. If it doesn't work, let's say game week 4, game week 5, quite easy to get to Pukki then because he's cheaper.
The worst thing about Pukki is the GIF. It's that bloody
Nobody
GIF.
wants to see that again.
Everyone hates it. It's so bad. I'm so upset that they're back.
Twitter really need to introduce a mute GIFs function.
Yeah, or I have epilepsy function or something.
Exactly.
Jesus, I will have it if I keep seeing them. All right.
Or the ability to be able to report GIFs. But I think, so that rule seems like it's a thumbs up. So if we move on to the second rule, so this was something that I think it's Joe from Fantasy Football Scout first started talking about, which is to use price points to balance your team. So, for example, you might make sure you have the most expensive defender, midfielder and striker to give you a bit more flexibility. So, I mean, is this a rule you'd look at or a rule you agree with?
It is now, but it hasn't always been. So if I think back, even just maybe 3 or 4 seasons ago, this is, the first time I started seeing people, probably like Joe on the Scoutcast and people on Twitter, just tweeting like 15 player prices and nothing else and saying, this is how I'm going to set up my team this season. I used to scratch my head thinking, why on earth would you do that? It's all about players. But I've really warmed to it over the last season or two. And it just comes back to that flexibility thing. I think if you do keep those prices in mind when you're setting up your team, it does make things a lot easier to jump on emerging players that there's players now that no one has in their team, but after 2 weeks, everyone's going to want them. So it's good. I think it is quite important I would never go out of my way and, pick my prices of each position before I pick my players. I'll always pick my players first. But once the team's picked, I'll ask myself, is that a flexible team structure? Are the price points flexible? I mentioned already the Tony example. I'd rather have a more expensive player than Tony and go to Tony later if he proves himself in the first 3 weeks than trying to go the opposite direction. So, yeah, absolutely. Price points is something I definitely will be thinking about not before I build my final draft, but once it's finished, I'll have a kind of reflection and think, is this flexible? Across all 3 positions. Goalkeeper's not so much, but definitely the other 3 positions.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a tick box for you. Like, is this team viable for the first 6 fixtures? Is this team safe enough that I won't be bothered if some of the players go wrong? And then finally, like, is this flexible? Are the price points good enough for these 10 players that are on my watch list?
Yeah, I think a good example of that is, I've built 1 or 2 drafts that are 4-3-3. So, we're going with the 2 4.5 million midfielders. Yeah. Which is something I've always said to people. If someone sends me a team in the past couple of seasons, first thing, if I see 2 4.5 million midfielders, I think that's a red flag for me right away in terms of flexibility. But
now Billy Gilmore is a 4.5 midfielder, and all bets are off.
What's 2 times 38? Because that's going to be what his points total is going to be this season.
Yeah.
He's like what I ask for when I go to the barber, a short back and sides. Man,
you're doing me dirty.
But I think there's not too many midfielders I like going into the season.
Yeah.
Which makes, and obviously a lot of good defenders and a lot of good strikers. So I think a lot of people will start with 4-3-3 with the 4.5 million midfielders. I'm not ruling it out myself either. The beauty is, I think there's quite a few unknowns going into the season.
Yeah.
And I'm quite open to playing it early, an early wildcard this season. So yeah, I think that's just a good example of maybe you shouldn't always have strict rules from season to season. Like, for example, I'm saying I never would have went for two 4.5 midfielders in the past, but I'm open to it this season if it feels right when I build that final draft.
All right, rule number 3 is the simple captain choices. What is your mantra for captains? What's your ultimate go-to?
This will be one of my exact word for word rules on. I haven't drawn up my list of rules for the new season. I do a new one every season, and I adjust things slightly. I haven't done it yet, but certainly one of them is just going to be keep captaincy simple, because 2 seasons ago my captaincy was really, really poor, and last season I really wanted to improve on that, and I successfully did. I think 2 seasons ago I think I got about 19% of my total points from captains. And I got that up to about 24 or 25% last season. And it was basically not overthinking it with the captaincy, so keeping it very simple. For example, I think there was some occasions last season where I literally gave my captaincy maybe 10 minutes thought, maybe even 5 minutes thought on a Friday. And it's just going into the season thinking every week, I'm going to captain a big hitter who's got a good fixture. Don't think any more of it than that. So your Salahs, your Brunos, your Harry Kanes. If I look back on my captains last season, there's probably only 3 or 4 occasions when it wasn't one of those 3 players, and it served me well. I mean, it's a boring captaincy strategy, but it was very effective last season.
Yeah.
And usually, I mean, you're paying the big money for these guys. You really want to be captaining them as often as possible anyway. So that's what I'll be doing this season. If I fast forward to May now, and when I'm reflecting on my season, I expect to see maybe 2 or 3 players who I captain probably 33 or 34 of the game weeks. Just really zone in on those top 2 or top 3 premiums.
Would players outside of those, those premium 3 that you mentioned, would they be players that are playing in a double game week, for example? Would that be the most common reason you deviate from that?
That's probably the main one. Or else if you've got a scenario where, let's say you've got Salah and Bruno midfield, let's say Salah plays Chelsea, Bruno plays Liverpool in the same game week. Well, it's not going to happen because it's the same teams, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
If your 2 big premiums have 2 difficult fixtures, that's when I might start looking elsewhere. So yeah, I'll always be open to it. If you've got if a whipping boy presents itself this season, if there's a team that's getting beaten 3 or 4 every week by everyone, then captaining a midfielder or an attacker against those teams. Sometimes I do that. Sometimes I do go out of my way to target a very weak defence, and try and captain as often as possible against them. So yeah, for me, it's very much keep captaincy simple. Don't give it that much thought. But I do use that, a matrix. I do build a matrix for myself. Look at the next 6 to 8 game weeks, pick out the best captain each week, and that kind of takes your decision away. Because let's say you make a matrix game week 1 for the first 6 game weeks. When you arrive in game week 5, you already know basically who your captain is, so you don't really need to give it much thought unless something has drastically changed with that player or that team.
All right. Have you made your matrix yet?
Not yet. But top of my head, Salah, probably 4 of the first 6 game weeks.
Yeah.
And then probably Bruno, game week 3 and game week 4. I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward to begin with. Yeah. I think Bruno has Wolves and Newcastle 3 and 4, and I think Salah's got pretty good fixtures 1, 2, 5 and 6. So there you go. I'm not, first 6 games, I'm not even to think about captaincy.
Already done. You're already paying for yourself.
I might start using the matrix idea. I mean, I did use it briefly last season, but the problem was I put players like Sterling on it, so I think I let myself down with the players that I picked on the matrix.
I think the key to the matrix is, like, let's say you're looking at game week 2, just pick out 2 players rather than 3, 4, 5, because that's when it doesn't have much value if your matrix has loads and loads of players on it. I think try and narrow it down to those 2 or 3 players that you really want to trust with your armband for the season. Bruno, Salah, you can probably throw KDB in there when he's fit.
So the 4th rule is no hits, and I know Dave's added a couple of caveats to that. So it's no hits outside of injuries and double and blank game weeks as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, what are your thoughts on hits, outside of those examples?
Yeah, so traditionally I've been a manager who tries to take as few hits as possible, and I'm really going to try and get back to that this season, because I mean last season was to me, last season's a bit of a throwaway in terms of strategy and how you play your usual game, because I think I think I made 49 transfers last season, where usually I would try to aim for 40 or not go too far over 40.
Right.
I think I remember some of my best ever seasons. I think I only made like 38 or 39. So really patient, sticking with players long term. So I'm going to go into this season going to aim for 40. I don't mind going slightly over, but I think it's a good target if I want to be the patient manager that I've always been. When it comes to hits, then in my head, I'm thinking, minus 20 in total. So, maybe 5 hits, but that's probably outside of, your usual blank game weeks and double game weeks, because we know it's much easier to take a hit in those game weeks. So that's kind of where my head's at. Aim for 40 transfers and aim for maybe a maximum of 5 hits in normal game weeks. So yeah, what I've always liked about not taking hits is 2 things. It's, first of all, it forces you to be a bit more patient with players that you bought for a reason, and you don't sell them too quickly when they're not delivering immediately, because very often we see people, complaining. They sell a player, they have them for 3 weeks, they do nothing, they sell them, and then the 4th game week they do really well. You see them on Twitter saying, I hate this game.
Yeah.
But, you should have just been a bit more patient, because you didn't buy them just for 3 game weeks. And number 2, I really like, not taking hits, but also just trying to bank a transfer as often as possible, because I always think if you can arrive at a game week on a Friday with 2 free transfers when most other people only have 1, it's a very powerful position to be in. You can move things around a lot more. And I do like, when I talked about those, maybe taking 5 hits this season, or aiming for 5 hits.
Yeah.
I would hope that those hits are, 2 free transfers and a hit. So making 3 transfers in one game week, because I think, they call it the mini wildcard. It completely transforms your team. If you change 3 out of your starting 10, your team looks completely different. And it's a good feeling when you can make 3 changes and you can feel really good about it. Then you'll get rid of 3 that you're not happy with, and bring in 3 exciting prospects. So yeah, I like those mini wildcards.
When I listen to your 59th minute pod, more often than not, the transfers you're making are 0 and you're gonna bank it. And I'm like, and then when it comes to the mini wildcard episode, I'm like, oh, I'm so jealous, and I just turn it off. I'm like, I don't want to listen. I'm already in minus 8. Like, I'm not doing this. Last season, obviously it was the first season I was doing the rules, and I put in no hits, and I was taking a lot less, and it was maybe about 5 or 6. But I found that once I dipped my first toe into the hit pool, I did another one again the next week, and I was like, no, I'm starting to feel the bug again. Like, I can't do this. So what I started doing, actually, if you are like me, or anyone watching's like me, and you can start to feel yourself creeping back to old ways, is I started thinking that every single transfer was a hit, even if it was like your free transfer for the week. So every transfer costed -4, and what that did was it trained my brain to really like scrutinize exactly what you said, scrutinize every transfer, make sure that you are absolutely certain that this is something that you want to do. And what it makes you think is, well, would I take a -8 for that player because I've already got a -4, instead of, even though it would have only been my first hit of the week, but just that mentality actually really, really worked out well.
The way I've always played the game too is, I always think if you manage your team really well from week to week, you shouldn't have to take many hits.
Yeah.
Instead of, let's say, game week 2, game week 3, instead of jumping on a bandwagon that everyone else is doing, if you can be disciplined and get rid of the injured player, or get rid of the suspended player, the weak people always talk about focus on your weakest link.
Yeah.
I think it's a great way to play the game. If you really focus on that weakest link every week, most of the time you shouldn't ever have to take a hit. So yeah, that's always, I always try and just manage my team as efficiently as possible, because we know how hard points are to get in FPL. So why throw away 4 very often? Yeah. That's the way I look at it. You know what I mean? You're throwing away a goal from a striker.
Yeah, or a clean sheet. Like people are like, oh, I'm gonna take a hit to bring this player out for 1 week. And it's like, what? Why? Well, then you're just throwing away everything. Rich, how many hits did you take last season?
I know, yeah, a lot more than I normally take. But I don't know if I like to think I'm quite patient and disciplined, but I actually kind of hate having 2 free transfers, because when I've got one transfer, I just think about maybe moving one player, maybe an injured player, to another player, option A or option B. When I've got two transfers, I start thinking I could use one transfer, I could use two, I could mini wildcard. I don't know. I end up with so many options in my head, and it kind of stresses me out a little bit more than just having one transfer.
So would you want to put in a caveat for this rule then, Rich? Is maybe if you're the type of manager to stress out about more than two options at a time, then maybe you need to not bank a transfer.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's not obviously it's not my episode, so I don't have to think too much.
Oh,
but
in your episode, we just made fun of you for 40 minutes.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to do it for a couple of minutes here, but if you're not game, then we can move on. What were you going to say, Mark?
I can definitely relate to that, Rich. Though having the two free transfers, it's great that it opens up the options, but sometimes it opens up too many.
Yeah.
And I remember, last season, sometimes sitting there on a Friday evening, with 10 options, and it's very, very hard then to kind of filter down to which one's the best one. So it's got its positives, but I can understand it. For some people, it does add some stress to the game, because if you've got too many options close to the deadline, you might make the wrong decision then. So it's not for everyone, I guess.
That's the thing, because if you've just got the two options, I mean, it's almost like flipping a coin. Like when it gets past the deadline, you're like, oh, I could have done the other one. Never mind, I'll move on. But when there's like 10, I spend the whole afternoon thinking option A, B, C, D, E, and it's almost like pot luck what time the deadline is, which one I go for, what kind of mood I was in, or
yeah,
you end up in decision paralysis. Then you go through them all, and then in the end, you just cannot decide which one's the best.
Exactly. And the one thing you can't do is roll a transfer.
Yeah, because you've already done it. I totally get it.
Yeah.
But see, the thing that I think that's the worst part about what we're talking about just now is that when you have one transfer, you're usually looking at your weakest link, like you mentioned, Mark. But then when you have two transfers and you have the option of a mini wild card, you start to look at those players that have been in your team for a while. We call them core players. And you start to think, oh, you know what, I could shuffle about some big players maybe, like if you've been thinking about getting De Bruyne in for Bruno or whatever. Now it is actually a possibility, because it means that any money that you're saving up, you're not just leaving in the bank, oh, I've got this guy I can upgrade and stuff. So that actually takes us really nicely into rule number 5, which is minimal core team transfers. Basically, you get your core players, your goalkeepers, your premiums, maybe your bench, one or two players surrounding your premiums, and then you leave them in your team long term. What you saying to that, Mark?
Yeah, again, it's kind of how I play the game. I like to have maybe 7 or 8 of a starting 11 in game week 1 that I would like to think hopefully those guys will still be there in game week 38.
Yeah.
And then when it does come to your transfers, it's really around the fringes. Maybe it's that 4th midfield spot or your 3rd striker. And again, I think it just helps if you go into the season and just really, put your faith big time in 7 or 8 core players. It should help with the other rule of not having to take hits, because you shouldn't have to make too many transfers if you're going to trust those guys long term. But of course, if you've got a core of 7 or 8 and one of them is not delivering, don't be stubborn either, and don't think, right, I highlighted this guy as a core player game week 1. We're now in game week 7. He's done nothing for me. Don't fall into the trap of keeping him out of blind faith either. You've got to be flexible with everything in FPL, and just bring in a new core player, and then hopefully that guy again will be there come game week 38. So yeah, I definitely do. And that core in my team is already forming: Trent, Robbo, Salah, Bruno, Antonio, Watkins. I could probably throw in those 6 names right now. Rafinha might even be a 7th.
Woofed.
For my game week 1 as a core. I'm pretty sure most of those guys are going to be in there. And if they play the way we expect them to, there's no reason why you couldn't keep them all season, regardless of fixtures.
It's funny. I knew this was happening, and I was doing a little bit of thought, what might Mark say and stuff, and I was reading the rules, and I got to 5 minimal core team transfers, and I was like, this is the first one that he's gonna throw up a caveat. and it's simply because of Ramsdale. Like the amount of time that you spent with that core player in your team, and you just let him rip your whole game week apart because of how bad he was for a long time. So I was actually going to mention it in a kind of like what we learned sort of way, like when this rule goes too far, how long is too long to keep your core team in your core team? But you kind of mentioned it, right?
Yeah, you're probably thinking maybe after 6, 7 weeks. I would like to think if someone is not doing it. I think Ramsdale probably, I can't remember offhand, but I think it was definitely more than 10 weeks he stayed.
Oh yeah.
But I think the problem there was it's so hard to use a transfer on a goalkeeper. It's so
Yeah.
boring, and
Yeah.
that was the other reason. But again, I think the other lesson for me in that last season was, why pay 5 million when there was plenty of good 4.5s? So I think I'm going to go back to my usual strategy this season of just going 4.5 and 4. Just spent 8.5 million on the goalkeeper position, because no matter what I do this season, it can't be worse than my goalkeeper position last season.
You set
So
the
I may
bar
as well
so
spend as
low.
little as possible because I'm going to be up on the deal regardless of what happens.
Yeah, it was really annoying following your season last year because you were doing so well, and every single time it was like, oh, but you still got Ramsdale, I've got a chance, like, but you just zoomed off. As soon as
Imagine
you took
how
him out.
well I could have done
No,
if I had any other goalkeeper.
I know, literally any other ones. All right, moving on.
Yeah. So rule number 6 is plan your wildcard timing. So I mean, I guess especially with game week 1, while we're setting our game week 1 teams, do you have a plan in mind for when you're going to activate that wildcard?
This is probably one of the rules that I don't agree with. The last 2 seasons, I went into the season with no plan to wildcard, no specific time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really one of these managers who's sitting here, now before game week 1 and looking at, between game week 3 and 4 looks good, between 7 and 8 looks good. I don't think you can know when the best time to wildcard is until we have some information on the season, until we see if the popular game week 1 players are going to be popular, if they're going to get us points, or if a lot of them are going to flop and we're all going to have to completely change our teams very quickly.
Yeah.
So this season, I'm just going to have an open mind. I'm going to be open to playing it early, but I'm also going to be open to playing it very late. I think the last 2 seasons I left it to the last game week, like game week 19. And even when I did play it in game week 19, I made only like 3 or 4 changes. To be honest, I've even been considering this might sound crazy, but being open to the idea of not using one of the wild cards as well, because so often, what's the most common thing you see the week after someone plays a wild card? My old team outscored it. So often the wild card disappoints, and I think if I'm in a position, let's say I get to game week 16, 17 this season, and things are going really well, my squad's really healthy, no injuries, very happy with it, I'm going to be open to the idea of just letting the first wildcard burn, because I think what a wildcard does, it forces you feel like you need to make loads of changes.
Yeah.
But if things are going really well, if your team is as good as it can be, why should you change it?
I mean, you're totally right. And the fact that you only used 4 of the transfers last season, still, it's not as big of a flex as burning it, but it's pretty good anyway.
Yeah, I think it would be, I don't know, something inside me would love to be one of those first maybe high-profile managers who doesn't
be the
use
biggest
one of
tweet
their
ever.
wild cards.
Mark's burning his wild card.
Hopefully this my season does go well, that I have the option, or at least if I do it, if my starting 11 are performing really well, really happy with them.
Yeah.
Just change the bench players if they need to be changed. But yeah, I always say it. Wildcards are a curse. Wildcards are the devil. So what's the way to get around that? I think some of us should start thinking about not using it if we're in a position where.
Yeah.
Think if you're top 1K, top 10K, top 50K, I think you're in danger of derailing your season by taking out some players who've been doing really well for you. So yeah, I think wildcard is an interesting one.
Let's put something down in writing then. Like let's get down to the nitty gritty, Mark. If you are top 5K game week 16 and you haven't used your wild card, will you let it burn? Like where are we how good of a season are we having to go? Let's money where your mouth is.
See I think it actually doesn't matter. where your rank is. I think
that's
it
boring.
it comes down to how healthy your squad is looking.
Yeah.
And if you're really happy with it, if there's not 6 or 7 players you think, oh, I really need to get these guys. I remember my second wild card last season, the one we talked about already. Getting triple Chelsea.
Mm-hmm.
I got rid of players like Soufal. I got rid of Watkins. Players that were so good to me all season, and then they just continued to score points.
Yeah.
And there was no such thing as a wild card. I would have a better rank. I would have finished with a much better rank if I didn't play that second wild card. So yeah, it's something I've been thinking about, and I know it's a bit crazy, and I think it's quite unlikely to arrive in a scenario where you're 100% happy with your squad. But I think more people should start thinking about not using it, because if you're someone who you feel like every time you use your wild card it derails your season, why not just not use it?
It is very interesting that, and I remember a lot of people wildcarding last season also threw they built up a lot of value in. I think Martinez was a popular one. They built up a lot of value in him. Then they ended up wildcarding and just changing the keepers because you can. And then they wanted Martinez back, a couple of weeks later. And then you can start being stubborn. Like, you don't want to pay more for a player you've sold. So I can see the value in that, but that would take a lot of willpower to do that.
And there's another good example. I got rid of Martinez and I got Mendy. And I'm pretty sure Martinez outscored him at least for the first couple of game weeks after my wildcard. So yeah, I was did a podcast with Prince Abdullah towards the end of last season, and we both spoke about this wildcard scenario. He played his wildcard as well, and it was an absolute disaster. So both of us that's kind of where the juices got flowing for me in terms of it should be an option. Just because it's there, you don't have to use it.
No need to rule out the idea of not using one, but like this could also be recency bias. Like my last wildcard went swimmingly. my last wildcard got 152 points that week.
You can't just base it off the week where you play it. I guess you play that whole season.
I mean, that's what the caveat is like, oh, it's not the start, it's the long term for your wildcard. But my start was good enough, and I have to look for long term. But yeah, no, I totally get it. I would see if that happens.
I just like the idea of when I'm 80 years old, I'm sitting around a fireplace, telling the grandkids stories about my FPL career. I'll probably still be playing it when I'm 80, but I'll be able to tell them there was this one season, back in COVID times, back in 2021, 2022. And do you know what, kids? I didn't play my wild card.
And they're still talking about it now. I can't even. I remember once I almost burnt a transfer and ended up changing my backup keeper just because I didn't want to, burn it.
That's ridiculous.
So let's see what happens on that front as the season goes on.
Fair play. All right, rule number 7: no team or player bias. This is slightly different from last season. I had no team bias, and all we did was talk about the guy who won with just Everton players, no Liverpool players. But this time I wanted to add player bias, because we do get a lot of, they've burned me in the past, so I'm not getting them again, or they're injury prone, so I'm not getting them again. And it's something that you talked about quite often. So I wanted to ask you if that's something that you're changing your tune this season, or you're going to be sticking to your preemptive, these players are bad, they're on my naughty list.
I'm really, really going to try and change it. I think for me and for most managers, it's probably one of the hardest parts of the game is to draw a clean slate at the start of the season and completely forget about what people have done. Yeah. In particular, which players have done well for you and which players haven't, because that means absolutely nothing going into a new season. Every player starts on 0 points. I think Bamford's a good example. Bamford was in and out of my team quite a few times last season. I used way too many transfers on Bamford alone, and I managed to always get him at the wrong time. So it became a very frustrating. I grew to hate the player as an FPL asset.
Yeah.
And then when I made my first FPL draft maybe a month ago, he wasn't in it. But as the weeks have gone by, and I've been listening to podcasts and doing some, looking at some of the numbers from last season, I'm starting to think, I actually think Bamford could be a really good option this season, even though he's a lot more expensive. I think we need to forget about what his price was last season anyway. Like I said, it's a new season. He's on 0 points. He could easily justify 8 million. I think we've seen it with Jimenez a couple of seasons ago. He got a big price hike to 8.5, and he was still pretty good value. So that Bamford kind of reminds me of that Jimenez price jump.
That's a good
Phenomenal
point.
numbers last season. On penalties now as well. Leeds, I just expect him to continue getting better. Arguably, in my eyes, one of the best coaches in the world. And they will create plenty of chances for Bamford. It just depends on how many
Yeah.
he'll put away. So, yeah, I'm really trying to. I mean, Callum Wilson, going back a couple of seasons, he was my ultimate troll, but he's in my current draft. So I think that probably shows you. I try not to let past
Yeah.
experiences, whether they're good or they're bad. I think that's a good. People will always talk about the bad experiences with players, but even if a player's been amazing for you, for 2 seasons running, that doesn't mean they're going to give you a third one. So always think of that as well. So yeah, definitely going to really try. I always try just have tunnel vision, pretend I'm an alien. I came down from space,
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
played FPL before, never seen a Premier League game before. I'm completely new to the game this season. What would I do?
It's kind
I
of
like that. I like that rule, and it happened with Harry Kane as well, because I think he was 5 million in his first season, and I think people were saying, "Oh, he can't do that again." And I think he went up to like 9.5 or 10 million. And I don't have his ownership in front of me, but I remember a lot of people went without Kane because he was basically double the price, and it was the wrong thing not to get him.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing it. We're seeing it with the strikers this season. It's not just Bamford. Watkins, Calvert-Lewin,
Hmm.
Wilson. All of these guys have got a price bump, but they're all justified. They all had pretty good seasons last season, and there's no reason why they can't repeat it. And if they do repeat it, I think they'll still be good value. I think on reflection, those players, Bamford and Watkins, were ridiculously good value last season,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean they won't be just good value this season. So do try and forget about last season as much as you can.
I like that. It's actually interesting. The last point I'll make on this before we move on is that I've seen in Calvert-Lewin in a lot of drafts, and he's 8 million. And yes, Everton have decent starting fixtures. They've got a new manager, all the rest of it, right? But like Bamford's the exact same amount of money as Calvert-Lewin, and Bamford played a lot better than him. So I don't see why price would come into it, but especially when a lot of people have the exact same price point in their team. And it's one of the reasons why I do have Calvert-Lewin in my draft, is because I would like to switch to Bamford if need be, or I can go down the way like we talked about. So yeah, no, I'm right there with you with the don't worry about the price changes, no player bias and stuff. So very, very good.
Yeah, brilliant. And the final rule is the guest rule. So I don't know, Mark, if Dave advised you of this before. Sometimes he
did.
does. Sometimes he. Oh, that's good. That makes a change. I'm only joking, Dave.
Right, I had to look through our WhatsApp messages, Dave, to remind myself what I sent you today.
You sent
So,
it.
rule number 8 is avoid new players to the league and players from the promoted teams in game week 1. So we've kind of touched on this already.
Yeah.
But I always try and do this. So, last season I didn't have Havertz, I didn't have Timo Werner. This season I won't have Sancho, even though I'm a Manchester United fan. He's not even on my watch list, got no interest. I'll just see how he fits in. May not even start game week 1 anyway. So it's, and again, the promoted teams, I said it, the only ones who probably have a chance are Tony, but it's not because I firmly believe he's going to be amazing. It's because he's 6.5 and he fits into a nice team structure. And the goalkeepers, because the goalkeepers we said are slightly different. At 4.5, you can't go wrong with most 4.5 goalkeepers anyway. So yeah, it's just, I like picking proven players game week 1, because I always feel if you put in a few punts, and I always class promoted players and new players to the league as punts, you're much more likely to have to use a transfer to get rid of them than you are on someone who has been there, who's done it for a couple of seasons. And my approach to every season is to make as few transfers as possible, and that just fits into my strategy, because the more players I know I can trust over someone who's new, the less transfers I'm going to have to make. It's as simple as that.
Is there I guess a bridge between not having any of these players in your team and potentially a point in the past where that's burned you before? Like, is this rule, because obviously this is 8 simple rules and you have brought this up as one of the 8, so it is a key rule in your head, and I'm just wondering if that's because of the fact that you've looked up the stats and you've found that most new players are flops, or has it something happened to you in the past? Who hurt you, basically?
Off the top of my head, there's no major reason for it. I think it's because, again, if we really simplify FPL, which players score the most points, it's players from the top sides. So I always try and squeeze in as many players from the better sides. We do. It doesn't always happen, but traditionally we would expect promoted sides to struggle. It doesn't always happen. Like Wolves and Leeds have been exceptions to that rule. But
yeah,
it's if a team is going to struggle, they're probably not going to score many FPL points. So I would rather, instead of going for a 4.5 defender from a promoted team, there's loads. Luke Ayling, Ben White, Fofana, play for better teams who you can have a bit more faith in. And as a result, should get you more FPL points. So yeah, there's nothing in the past where I've had loads of promoted players and it hasn't worked. And Mitrovic was in my Game Week 1 team last season, but it's probably a bit like Tony. It was probably down to price.
Yeah,
he just kind of fitted into the team structure.
And penalties as well.
Yeah, it's not, and he was in the league before, I think, which helped. So I'm not like 100% no players whatsoever. You may see my Game Week 1 team, and there may be one player in there, but it probably won't be any more than one. I do try and keep it to a minimum.
Fair play. All right. I think that was really, really good. There's a few things I've learned here. There's definitely a few caveats we're going to have to add to these rules. We're going to do a little summary of the rules at the end and just kind of like tick box on which managers liked which, maybe do a little graph. But yeah, no, thank you so much for coming on and giving us your 2 cents. And I particularly like your last rule because it's something that I would have added in there if I had more than 8. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, cheers for having me, lads. And yeah, hopefully we can all stick to these rules and have a good season.
When are you making your rules? When are you doing it?
It'll be probably next week. I'm just thinking in the back of my mind here as well. If I'm just wondering if Game Week 19 comes before Christmas, because I'll be able to ask Santa Claus for I didn't play my first Wildcard T-shirt.
That's why I'll be sad about it, because I remember you doing that Christmas Wildcard. I think it was actually on Christmas Day or very close to it.
Yeah, I think it was one of those. Yeah, it was Boxing Day, I think. So the games were on Boxing Day. Deadline was like 11 o'clock on Boxing Day. So obviously you couldn't have a more dangerous time to play a wild card.
No wonder you don't want to use it anymore.
I remember doing a wild card a couple of years ago as well I think it was on New Year's Day. There was a deadline on New Year's Day.
Yeah.
Big night out. Woke up at like 11:15. I think the deadline was 11:30 at the time. So I had maybe 45 minutes to pick players, and I was seeing like 4 players of each player on that phone. So yeah, try not to wildcard around Christmas Day or New Year's Day.
Rule 9: don't wake up hungover and do your wildcard.
That's the one you just mentioned is the only deadline I've ever missed. I think it was the Spurs double game week as well, just to make it worst deadline to miss. But yeah, that's brilliant. So no, thank you for coming on, Mark. And look forward to hearing your rules as well on your pod on the 59th minute.
Yeah, you'll hear it before the season starts. So yeah, keep an eye out for that one.
There you go. And Mark is a fairly small time Twitter handle, so do give him a follow, FPL General. He's kicking about. He's been kicking about for a while. Thank you again so much for coming on. Everyone subscribe if you're new here. That'd be great. And yeah, one last thing to say, Rich.
Up the pod.
Up the bloody pod. See you next time.
Up the pod.